Again, good morning. This is exciting. My name is Lloyd Purdy. I'm the Vice President for Regional Competitiveness at Greater Portland, Inc. And I'm excited because this wraps up 4 or 5 months of work from a project that was started back in February of this year, an inaugural project, something that had never been done before in this region and might not have ever been done anywhere else in the country or the world. And I'm pleased that we can bring to you today the results. You might, if you're a guest here in this room, I mean, if you're not a panelist, you should know that this is probably the most well-staffed panel for the whole conference. We've got about a 12 to 14 person panel because this project encapsulates the work of 5 different teams that have been working since February on public-private partnerships, all focused on a smart cities theme, specifically on mobility. So what we did with PAO as a partner is that we gathered public and private sector innovators together in order to showcase this region's problem-solving talent, in order to build public-private partnerships, and to inspire innovation. And this matters to us at GPI because firms all over the country and all over the world are interested to see how this region is excelling and becoming one of the smartest smart cities in the world. I have a colleague who is just in Germany. There's several German firms that are now curious about how we are leading the mobility in the mobility sector for smart cities. And just this week, well, maybe it happened more than a week ago, but we know some other international venues like the city of Santiago, Chile is curious about what we're doing here in Portland, wondering if some of the technologies we're innovating, the way we're thinking, the way we're building public-private partnerships can translate. So Greater Portland, Inc. often goes by the letters GPI, and I'm a firm believer that the P in GPI stands for partnership building. And really at its core, that's what we did with this project. We built partnerships. So without much more introduction, let me move forward. I do want to recognize 2 of our founding sponsors for this inaugural Tech Challenge. Both PGE and Daimler were instrumental in giving us the assistance, the confidence, the boost we needed to host a Tech Challenge. What we did was host a day of pitching, where agencies pitched their most confounding or interesting mobility challenge. A round of applause, please, for the, yeah, go ahead, applause. For our public sector partners, our agencies, our cities that were brave enough to say, we recognize that we can't solve every problem without some other critical thinking. We will come into a public auditorium and share that we have some challenges we want to solve. That takes, as a one-time city employee, I know that takes a little bit of bravery to be able to recognize that we can't solve every problem. So we did pitches, and then we asked firms to counter-pitch their capacity solving. They didn't hack a challenge. They didn't solve the problem that day. They simply said, we know about those types of problems. Here's how we would attempt to solve something similar. After the morning of pitch and counter-pitch, we did one-on-one consults. Every city met with at least 2 and sometimes 3 tech firms for a one-to-one hour-long consult where they could do a deeper dive on their problem. The idea was that you might have an idea of a challenge or a problem area, a transportation or mobility issue, but until you talk about it with somebody outside of your office, you maybe don't fully understand it. So a key value to this Tech Challenge back in February was this one-on-one consult. At the end, we invited public agencies to move forward with a demo or a public pilot project with a tech firm, and we did that by inviting agencies to hand out a Golden Hubcap Award. Do you want to, Lee, go ahead and show everybody what a Golden Hubcap Award looks like? At the end of the day, 10 cities each presented a Golden Hubcap to a tech firm that they wanted to talk to in more detail and maybe work with. And we are going to highlight 5 of those projects today for the rest of this presentation, and then we'll wrap with some questions from the audience, because some of you in the audience are wondering maybe how can you help build public-private partnerships centered on smart tech and mobility. This is a slide that shows the agencies, the cities, and even some private sector entities that came forth back in February with a mobility challenge. This is a slide that shows the 9 or 10 tech firms that said, we're going to respond to one of these challenges. Either we have capacity across a broad range, or we have a very focused capacity. A range of firms came into this program. Some of them knew how to solve a very specific problem. Some had a very general and wide-reaching capacity. We added a surprise element. It wasn't enough just to do a first-time event. We took some content and some technical experts that were participating, and they were coaches. They made themselves available throughout the afternoon to do a drop-in and facilitate some conversation or add some background that might not have been present in the room. So we have the put me in coach category, and that was a nice addition to this new event. This gives you a sense of the pitches, the agencies, and some of the firms. And I like these photos because it shows, I do think, the rapt attention. The audience was not daydreaming like some of you are. No, I'm just kidding, I can tell you're paying attention. For the whole morning, every pitch that was about a 3 to 4 minute pitch had the full attention of the audience in the room. Then we broke again into these one-to-one consults where there was some good problem solving happening at the conceptual level. And of course, as you've seen, we have in the audience a live Golden Hubcap. I should say that the team from Hack Oregon did walk away with 2 Golden Hubcaps. So kudos to them. So we're about to get into the phase of this presentation where you will get a quick, brief introduction to each project. Each panelist will talk a little bit about how they formed a public-private partnership, some of the challenges, and then we'll hand the mic off to the next team. So this is a real quick orientation for those of you in the room that don't know about this project, or those of you on a team that don't know maybe what some other team was working on. We'll wrap that phase up with some questions that I will queue up, and then if you have questions, we'll try to handle those as well. So in random order, and they don't know what order they're presenting in, I'd like to invite the team from 10 Branch AECOM with Lake Oswego to either, come over here if you want, that's probably good, or I can give you my stand here.
The slides.
Yeah, I can do that right here. Does this work for you?
That works for me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a surprise when we go first every time. Well, we're 2 for 2 at this point. Okay, my name's Miles Halliday, and I'm from 10 Branch. We're doing some development in Lake Oswego.
Jackie Mann, City Councilor, City of Lake Oswego.
And Omar Jaff with AECOM, lead the transportation group here.
Okay, and can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Loud. We have been looking at is the old Lake Oswego to Portland, or Portland to Lake Oswego trolley line that was built a long time ago, and it's been kind of dormant for the last 50 years or so. So that was kind of one of the challenges we're trying to look at with new vehicles and new types of transportation. What could be done differently or to optimize it in the future? Jackie can give you a little bit about the origins of the trolley and talk a little bit about
the
for
trolley.
those who don't know about the trolley line.
How many people have actually ridden on the Lake Oswego to Portland trolley? Anyone in the room? Alrighty then. This line was built in the 1800s, evolved over time as a small gauge trolley that became, believe it or not, a way to transport people from Portland out to Lake Oswego, which then was Oswego, for recreational purposes, picnics, what have you. This went on for a number of years until the railroad got involved. Well, before that, it was a red line. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the red lines that used to run through the western part of the United States. If you saw Who Framed Roger Rabbit, they had them in Los Angeles. We had one here, could run you all the way out to Beaverton. So it was really, if you kind of going back to the future in that regard. The railroad turned it into a freight rail, which was an interesting thing to do, which they ran until 1988, at which point a consortium, the city of Lake Oswego, Metro, TriMet, I'm gonna have to look at my crib notes here.
Multnomah
Multnomah County,
Clackamas.
and Oregon Department of Transportation purchased the right-of-way, and the trolley consortium came to be. In 2000, probably 8, began the move to put a light rail through that corridor. That failed in 2012, was quite an exciting thing for Lake Oswego. It was a little bit divisive, but apart from that, that failed. The trolley remains operable today. So that gives you a little history of what this is. The main thing being that what we're looking at is the primary goal of moving people, once again, between Portland and Lake Oswego in a way that will serve us into the future.
Yeah, and another point is, for those of you who don't know, Highway 43 is a major connector between downtown Lake Oswego and downtown Portland, and it's getting more and more congested over time. Back when I was a kid, it wasn't a problem to get back between the cities, but now it's, as you can imagine, when we're adding 30,000 people a year in the metro area, it's becoming more and more congested. And Jackie kind of talked about, one of the issues is that Metro for a long time has been looking for mass transit down that line. Lake Oswego has been more looking for a pedestrian bike path. So one of the things that came up, we started looking at the different types of vehicles that are coming out. And I think a lot of people in this room are pretty familiar with a vehicle like this. We see Toyotas talking about it. Ollie's making them. Navoya's been hitting things in Las Vegas, or at least hit one thing. And then Easy Miles running around Europe with them. So these vehicles are coming to fruition, and I think this would be kind of an interesting idea of trying to put these or put them all on the tracks, or not the track, but pave the trolley line and actually put these vehicles down. And Omar's been, as our private sector engineer, has been kind of educating us a little bit about the vehicles or what their potentials are. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, daisy chaining and kind of the viability
Sure,
of them?
so, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first of all, I want to start by saying this is a really exciting project. This corridor historically was a transportation corridor, and it's been utilized right now more of as a recreational corridor with the trolley, the vintage trolley that has excursions, but really, I think the future really demands for it to be a transportation corridor that is actually functioning. The attempt, the streetcar was a historic attempt that is basically looking at that problem and trying to resolve that problem. So this project is exciting because we're still continuing that problem and trying to resolve that problem. We're also looking at modernization of what are the technologies that are out there that we can implement the same kind of a service. So these vehicles that, they're connected autonomous vehicles, so they're driverless vehicles, but they have the ability to communicate with each other. So therefore, you can actually have them run in a series of vehicles that can increase and decrease the capacity of the corridor as needed. And that's a really important factor when we're looking at, well, what is the demand in this corridor? How does it function going back and forth? Because we really know the corridor itself. It's almost a dumbbell type shape where you have the demands are on the ends, but it has a very unique corridor in between that's beautiful along the river that is a great opportunity to create that connection. Lake Oswego is a little bit challenging to get into. Highway 43 is the main access into downtown Lake Oswego. As development happens within Lake Oswego, that demand is going to go up. The need for different modes, including pedestrians and bicycles. I've ridden Highway 43 on a bicycle. It's not a safe place to be. But having a corridor there that allows multimodal transportation options for Lake Oswego is an important project for you. So with that, I mean, really what I'd like to talk about a little bit is some of the challenges that are out there. I think one of historically this corridor has been has a tunnel in it right now, but it used to have trestles that collapsed. There are existing trestles there today. They're old and require a lot of maintenance, and they have to be maintained every 5 years in order to operate on it. There's a couple of landslides in that area as the Silver Bridge was getting rebuilt. They had to stabilize that whole entire bank there to be able to rebuild the Silver Bridge. So it has quite a bit of challenges in that sense. And the biggest challenge is the corridor itself threads through homes. And so there are some safety concerns, there are security concerns in that area. That all has to be really figured out as this project moves forward.
Cool. Yeah, and one of the other things, so we've been looking at different variations. Like one of the questions that Lloyd asked us is kind of how has this evolved over time. I think one of the things that we've been pretty upfront about is we don't have the answers for this, and Omar and one of his colleagues, Mike, have done a good job of kind of talking to us about different variations about what we could do. This kind of shows a little bit of, like up the top is kind of what the corridor looks like today. You kind of got bicyclists on both sides. You have 3 lanes of traffic. I would not be, I have, like Omar, I've biked it I think twice in my life. I probably would never do it again. It's really nasty. It's a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit, really narrow, uphill, downhill. And then you have the trolley kind of about a quarter mile to the east, on its tracks. We have different options. We could keep the Highway 43 corridor the same. We could put a streetcar on the trolley line. We could instead of putting a streetcar, we could put this type of vehicle on it. And then if we pave the road and put these small micro buses even on virtual rails, we could then pull them off for the weekends and have more of a bike pedestrian corridor. So the idea is trying to figure out how do we serve both constituencies of both the people who are looking for more of a bike pedestrian path, which would be maybe one of the most beautiful corridors we have in the Northwest in terms of goes through this really old neighborhood with these old growth trees. It goes through this really beautiful tunnel all along the riverfront. But at the same time, we're dealing with our needs of moving people in and out of downtown Lake Oswego into Portland. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this is I think we've been looking at other places where we could implement this type of autonomous vehicle. We have the issue of getting across the river, connecting downtown Lake Oswego to Milwaukee. So it's actually stirred a whole bunch of conversations about what the potentials are in the future. So, anything else you'd like us to address? Is that good?
It's a good start, good orientation. We'll circle back around.
Okay, sounds good.
Next up, the Hack Oregon team with Portland Bureau of Sustainability and Multnomah County.
Thanks, everyone.
If you'd like, we can do some on that side with the clicker and some here, but you all decide how you want to present.
I'll stand in front.
Sure.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lee Coates. I'm the executive producer for Hack Oregon's Transportation Systems team. Hack Oregon is an organization that supports open data and assists municipalities with entering into the open data world. Our data manager, Brian, over there, helped lead us this season through some great collaborations with both the City of Portland and Multnomah County. Really these are really ongoing relationships, and Greater Portland Tech Challenge gave us the opportunity to showcase some of the collaborations that we have. Let's see what we've got next. Ah, yes, I see. There we go. Okay.
Yeah. I can.
Okay, you want to, okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. You want to lead or you want me to do the slides?
I can just,
Yes,
let me
please.
introduce
So
myself.
sorry.
So as you can see, we still have a lot to do in terms of collaboration and synchronization in this, working with these projects, which is a challenge. I mean, that's a reality. However, I think we're going to be committed to this project. My name is Hector Dominguez. I'm the Open Data Coordinator for Smart Cities, and I work for the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability for the City of Portland. And then just very quickly, you saw a number of, oh, okay, there we go. So this is basically data sets that the city owns. It's information we own, information about how different sensors for environmental air quality monitoring we have. We own sensors around like where the transit is going. We just installed some traffic monitoring modules on like high risk accident prompt corridors on Division and Hawthorne. We installed 200 of those sensors on electric poles. They are going to deliver count of cars, pedestrians, bikes every 2 seconds. We are having this pilot. The technology comes from a private consortium built with General Electric, Intel, and AT&T. So we are very excited actually around how to use and explore that data and information. And that's a challenge because that's a lot of data, right? We are very happy because after a long process, we have our priorities framework approved by City Council as yesterday afternoon around 5 p.m. So it's brand new. And what that priority framework tell us is that we are going to put in front line all those communities that have been historically underserved. So there are many of those communities on East Portland. Those are very diverse communities that they speak many different languages. They actually are the ones in higher risk of being displaced, given the current housing crisis and all the prices here in Portland. So that's something that has changed recently. So the city has a number of plans, and however, this new perspective is actually forcing us to start talking to many grassroots organizations and having that civic engagement in ongoing. So building those bridges, building that common language that has been, and it's going to be a challenge, but I hope with all these use cases, we can actually deal with that and find solutions.
Exactly. Yeah, and so this is kind of where Hack Oregon comes in. We were really happy that the City of Portland and Multnomah County decided to take part in the the Greater Portland Tech Challenge. Specifically around the sensors that Hector was just describing, we are acting as a micropilot for this kind of concept that Hector was just talking about with up here, the city data lake. And that data lake really brings together all sources of different sources of data, so that way we can do cross-analyses. And the city and the county's willingness to participate in open data allows the citizens more access and more information about what decisions should be made. So this slide is really meant to just kind of show everyone the approach that Hack Oregon takes. We work very closely with the organizations that do provide us with data to ensure that security, privacy is considered, and also that we're telling the narrative that the organization is trying to say. For Multnomah County, for example, treasure trove of old permit data that's pivotal for their operational day-to-day work. However, for us citizens, wouldn't it be interesting for us to be able to see the evolution of both utility and telecommunication investments in our city? And that's what's in that data. And by partnering with both the city and the county, we're creating endpoints, APIs, basically just URLs that you can go to in a web page to view this data. So that way, it's not just within the organization anymore. And so really what makes this possible is a lot of education, a lot of learning, and a lot of experts from various different organizations. And it is really this culmination of all these different ideas and minds that enables us to do something as impressive as wrangle data that is in a data silo and bring it through development best practices, and also be able to show that as a template for others to then carry on the torch. And so this final slide is just some information about where you can get information, where you can get the data sets that we've made available. And kind of the idea here is that we aren't necessarily solving a problem or creating a specific product for the city or the county, but instead we're helping enable something that they're already doing and that they have a desire to do, but because of the operational constraints, they just haven't been able to before. So we definitely invite you to check out the Hack Oregon website where we've made this data available for you. Yes, it's the data lives on the Civic platform. Last night we had a demo where we got to show off all of the different themes from transportation and housing, neighborhood development, disaster resilience, and local elections. Transportation, we're very happy with this conference being in Portland to be able to focus on that today. But yeah, we do actually wrangle all sorts of municipal data sources, and they live on the Civic platform. Thank you so much.
So what's exciting about these first two projects we've seen, is that you heard me mention that we invited municipalities, transit agencies, and governments to present their biggest challenges to tech firms. In the first project, we saw a challenge led by the private sector. 10 Branch was taking the lead on that, working with the city of Lake Oswego. And then on this last project, you saw not a private sector firm solving some problems, but a totally volunteer group of how many volunteers on Hack?
This year was 125.
125 volunteers coming together to take data that's public and turn it into knowledge so that you and I can go home, access the Civic platform and learn something about our community. And that's something that's applicable for any city in the country. Do I understand that right? Through the Civic platform?
That's right.
Great, exciting. Okay, our next public-private partnership. The team from Hillsborough and the team from Mapillary, come on up.
Hello, I'm Taylor Wright. I'm in the planning department with the city of Hillsborough. We decided to put together a team for the Tech Challenge. We're really excited that we did. We feel that we've been really successful in our pilot so far. To start out, this is the image that we brought up for our Tech Challenge. We decided that what we wanted to get at was how can we access this data that is already available all around us, wrangling big data, kind of that almost generic smart cities kind of question that really everybody has. We all know the data is out there and everywhere, and we know that it's really challenging to access. So we went into it with that mindset, with a really general question. We got a few smirks, everyone's like, we know that's a problem, everyone's trying to solve that. How is your problem any different? And we acknowledge that, and as we were going through our meetings, we recognized that we needed to kind of walk before we were running. We were looking to initially grab information that was available everywhere and pull it all together, and we realized that we had some gaps in the data that we had already. So we need to focus on filling in those gaps and what we can best do in the most efficient way to fill in the data that we need. And so that's thinking about infrastructure data, thinking about filling in our sidewalk network, our bicycle facility network, some of those really fundamental pieces to what makes our city, and allows us to make really informed and complete policy decisions. So we partnered with Mapillary to do that, and we found that they're a great partner to help us fill in those gaps in a really efficient way. Because historically, it's really challenging, as I'm sure many of you know, to make comprehensive data sets and keep them up to date so that our information is always current and always available. So we worked with them to develop a workflow where we have our city and our city streets, and we Mapillary community partners drive those city streets collecting street view imagery that is then fed into their processes, and I'll let Ryan get into that a little bit in a minute. And from there, we can start to fill in our network. So we can think of these blue lines here as sidewalks. So we're learning where we have gaps, where we don't have gaps, just kind of reinforcing that information that is always changing as areas are developing, redeveloping, or just making general changes. Part of this process was a feedback loop. As streets are being driven, how can we identify areas where we have an error in our data set that they picked up. They have something that we know to be different within our own data sets. We kind of reinforce this process of data refinement and integration with some of our existing data sets. And on top of that, we want to make sure that this keeps building. It's a community-supported platform that we also have the ability to support as a city. So we can go back and drive our streets over and over and use our own vehicles and technology and existing workflows from other departments to make sure that the data we have available is always up to date and collected in the most efficient manner possible.
Thanks, Taylor. And so we'll show a little bit under the hood of what we worked on over the last several months. So at Mapillary, we focus on having an approach for scalable street-level intelligence, working from street-level imagery. So we're a platform for extracting map data using street-level imagery powered by computer vision. So we are open, anyone can use any type of camera, bring those images into our platform and process it with computer vision, meaning that we can provide map data and imagery for many types of organizations, whether you're community, government, or your commercial map makers. So today, our customers are using imagery from Mapillary and processing services to deeply integrate into their solutions that are in the dashboard of the cars that many people drive, that are in the community tools to update and maintain maps, as well as making routing decisions on millions of miles of mobility every single day. So we shared at the kickoff to the pilot that we work in the cycle of imagery comes in, it goes through a processing engine, we maintain privacy. We actually, during the course of the pilot, released our update where we can automatically blur faces and license plates at 99.9% accuracy, and we do that on a global basis on 300 million images in the platform, continually growing every day. All this means is that we have map data come in on a continuous streaming cycle. So what we did in Portland and in Hillsborough, we scaled up coverage of the region using a fleet of vehicles that we equipped. So within 30 days, we had a complete picture of the region. And this is imagery that's now available, publicly accessible on Mapillary, as well as those common tools that I mentioned a moment ago. So it represents roughly 5 million images that cover the region in all 360 degrees. There's some gaps here, but imagery is still coming in today. So what that means looking down on the street, so here in Hillsborough, we're off of Main Street, we can quickly go and navigate what imagery that was captured just a few days ago. When it comes into platform, it's processed, we can understand the context of the street image. So the colors coding here shows what's pavement, what's vegetation, sidewalks, utility poles. One of the things that we learned from working closely with Taylor and the team was that we could actually generate data faster than humans could consume and review 5 million images. So we found from our driving within those 30 days, 50,000 traffic signs in the city of Hillsborough. There's already an existing database of traffic signs. So what we learned is that we really needed a way for us to take the streaming data from a vehicle and streaming data from our platform. We build a workflow so we can build a comparison. So the next couple of tools are those early prototypes from taking our platform and now further integrating that into Hillsborough's workflow. So this is a quick comparison tool. We think there's legs to this to go further with Taylor and others of having a repeatable process where you can understand those differences between known data and new data. So the image here is showing this comparison of how we've detected a no truck sign, a couple of little differences in positioning, and now we can review the 15 images we have of that sign from many different angles and days of the week. We're also finding, challenges where our imagery did not detect a sign, so we actually can identify what the issue was. And here it's heavily obstructed from things that actually prevent the view for a person who's driving and navigating the street. So these are the types of outcomes that we think we can build into continual tools to task the tree trimming crew to go and find those locations that need some touch-up during the course of the growing season. So appreciate the opportunity. We're really excited about how Hillsborough has approached smart city challenges across the organization. It's not just one department that is trying to understand how they can use technology to improve their city, improve their management of the city. They're working across departments. We hope our imagery can be used in all of those areas, from assessors to parks departments to transport and public works.
Good morning. My name is Adrian Piermine. I'm with the transportation consulting firm DKS Associates. I'm based here in Portland, Oregon, and I'm our National Director for Smart Cities and Connected Vehicles. But our company primarily is transportation planners and traffic engineers working with a lot of agencies throughout the West Coast. WashDOT, the Washington Department of Transportation, it has been one of our clients for a long time. They came, unfortunately, we did not have a representative from WashDOT able to attend today, so you're just gonna have to take our word for it that their pitch, that we heard their pitch right. What was interesting, Lloyd, through this process is that the pitch and the ask sort of morphed as the DOT from their original ask when they got up there, and then the more they would explore, even over the course of the day, and then definitely in our follow-up meetings, it sort of changed shape a little bit. What I thought we heard when they were first pitching was that they were trying to address an issue with multimodal transportation connections and a desire to give citizens that are traveling in Southwest Washington more information about how long it's going to take you to get from point A to point B, and what are the different options if I'm in my car or if I'm taking transit, for example. So when I sat down and met with them, I said, hey, good news, guys. You don't have to build this from the ground up. On the Portland side of the river, TriMet's already involved with a federal program called the Mobility on Demand Sandbox that the Federal Transit Administration is running. And the whole point of this program is to support this multimodal trip planning. To allow you to say, I want to start in Camas and I want to end up in downtown Portland, and what are all of my options? Option A is drive your own car. It's going to take you 45 minutes. It's going to cost you this much, and it's going to be this bad on the environment. Option B is take C-Tran over here and then take TriMet down and take a bike share at the end of the route. And so the trip planner that TriMet is building through the multimodal or Mobility on Demand Sandbox is already going to do that on the whole Portland side of the river. And so I helped connect some dots between what WashDOT and C-Tran on the Vancouver side wanted to do and what was going on the Portland side. And TriMet had already been thinking about this and said, you know, all of our base mapping and all of our tools that we've been building, we've been planning to expand into the Vancouver side from day one. So all we need is WashDOT and C-Tran to come to the table and expand the Mobility on Demand Sandbox. But as I talked with them further outside of the meeting, I realized that at least one of the senior traffic engineers at the Washington DOT had a very specific use case in mind. So they are building out, they will be building out, I should say, a program on the Vancouver side called Active Traffic Management, ATM. And this is a concept that in Seattle, this picture is actually from Seattle. It's one of the first places in the Northwest that we've seen this deployed in the roadway. but it's a way for the traffic agency to actually manage what's happening on the freeways more actively instead of just in response mode. By changing speed limits, for example, by doing things like closing certain lanes and opening other lanes and telling the traveling public what they want to do. C-Tran, the transit agency up there, is experimenting right now with the Regional Transportation Council and WashDOT and other partners on looking at running buses on shoulder. So as we implement some of this new technology, we can open and close shoulders and help support that sort of thing. And the combination then of what you would show on these different signs with information signs on the side can more actively manage the transportation. So they had a very specific use case in mind, at least Scott Langer, the traffic engineer. So we're starting to see these signs on both sides of the river that are showing you travel times from point A to point B once you're actually en route. And they can show, in some cases, different travel times from two different corridors and allow you to make a choice of whether I'm going to take State Route 14 or I-84, for example. Or in other cases, just on the main line when you don't really have a choice, just giving you more information about how long it's going to take to get from point A to point B. So WashDOT was wondering, what if we could take these signs and say something like, it will take you this long to get to downtown Portland if you take the freeway. It would take you this long to get to downtown Portland if you take C-Tran. And put that kind of information at certain decision points where somebody who is coming from Camas can say, I'm actually going to pull over into the park and ride lot and take the bus today because it looks like 205 is completely backed up and transit's really not going to take me that much longer and it's much more hassle-free. So once we got to sort of understand what their real needs and desires and pain points were, our other partner, CA, Peter Associates, are going to talk a little bit about some of the enabling technology that we're sort of working on and presenting to WashDOT and hopefully eventually trying out in other partners on how we might be able to help bring a lot of these different disparate data sources together.
Thanks, Adrian. David Hoffman and Samir Gandhi from CA Technologies. I think you've got some slides, right? You want to flip through those? Yeah, once you overdrive. Again, it was interesting that WashDOT, let me back up even further and put a kudo in for the Greater Portland Tech Challenge that Lloyd Purdy ran. It's probably one of the most, active private and public partner event that we'd ever been to. It was open. It was like speed dating with a purpose. It was really a very solid event. So for those agencies or companies that are here, that when that happens again, I highly look at it. It was absolutely refreshing, and we've been through ones that are obviously less than productive. But it was interesting in that the WashDOT challenge came, and WashDOT was articulating that they were looking for a killer app. And we went, well, let me think on transportation. I can think of Google and Waze and a number of things. What you don't need is another killer app, because they've even got one internal. What you do need is a way to go ahead and connect the disparate information from a variety of sources and do it in a secure way that's in real time and of benefit to the people that are the end users. Samir is obviously the smart guy, I'm not, but can talk about the technology. So this slide, to an extent, displays how a variety of different inputs wind up putting that kind of information over on the right-hand side of the device. The framework by which it does that is an APIM management solution. Ones that you're probably already familiar with on a national side, as an example, is GM OnStar. APIM from CA is the one that actually makes all that information available to and from that vehicle. You know it in a larger national sense when healthcare.gov, Obamacare, all the exchanges between the disparate information on personal health information has to be done through an API gateway. So the good news for WashDOT, you don't need a killer app. Guess what? You don't have to do a bunch of massaging, even though you got 120 folks, good show, that can do that. It's the ability if one talks Greek and the other one Italian, the APIM gateway makes that decision, it's rules-based. So it's kind of, what's old's forever new to slow it down, dumb it down. I'm big on the dumb it down, he's the smart guy. I don't know, is there another slide here, but I gotta tell you that the refreshing, whatever flip through, the refreshing ability that we went to our Smart Guys Exhibit A, and said, look, here's the challenge of what they're trying to do, is to basically visually display, like you see already in Waze, something that may have just happened or something that was already planned, a construction event, those kinds of things that can augment the sharing of that information to reader boards, smartphones, websites, whatever. What was very interesting is, rather than the months, and this is where I'm in a fetal position in the corner rocking myself, because the dialogue was, well, it will take a lot of time and a lot of planning. What you're seeing displayed right here took about a week. Or maybe that's because he was busy with other stuff. Is it 3 hours? I don't know how long it took our smart guy, and this is another one here, to actually take the information from disparate locations and render it visually within an existing application. Maybe the next slide is an example, shows you that there is, for our hack folks, there's actually code that sits back, but the ability to go ahead and actually actively involve yourself or engage yourself to report that an accident has now occurred on the Glenn Jackson and those lanes 1 and 2 are shut down. It's a matter of keystrokes, it's not a heavy lift. So what I'm submitting, at least in this group, is number one, the Greater Portland Tech Challenge gave industry, folks that are already doing this, us. And, I mean, by history, for those who don't know, we're a 40-year, $4 billion, been around forever kind of company, but we focus today primarily on making sure that the tools are available for the modern application factory. Because that's what all the agencies are becoming, that's what all of industry is becoming. You go to bed as a bank and you wake up as an application company, you go, how the hell did that happen? Or if you're a law enforcement shop, it's the same thing. And to that end, the platform that we displayed, at least where the little phone was off to the side in the apps, it's the same rinse and reuse structure that we use for law enforcement, for FirstNet, for digital campuses, for smart cities. We can supply information to the group later. One case in point might be not a transportation group, but the entire country of Brazil, with 2.6 million in population, have got government diploma in their hands, brought to you or enabled by CA Technologies. So that's why we get excited about having those conversations, and we thank you for the format. If you have technical questions on the how, pick on him. I'm not the how, I'm the thing, the why. I really like to be able to have a conversation on why.
Thank you for your time on this phase. Let's rotate into the next panel and then community afterward. And I think you're up next again.
Screen on.
Metro.
Yeah, okay, I'll kick it off. I did not do any slides, Elliot, so you're gonna, I saw what you've done and said, okay, let's tell me the story that I'm telling, but I will try to do, here's what I thought I heard Metro say, yeah, and then we'll find out how close we were. It's like telephone. Yeah. So, so DKS was the other double gold hubcap winner that day, and so I'm proud to talk about this particular partnership as well. Metro, Elliot is doing some interesting work and will be doing some really interesting work on how does Metro get involved with this whole smart cities concept, and how do we take this equity issue that everyone's talking about and really put some meat on the bones. Like how do we take these equity challenges, look at communities that have been underserved, underrepresented historically in our regional investment in transportation, and help find some first and last mile solutions, for example, to connect those communities into our transit and transportation network, give new mobility options to a lot of folks who've traditionally been underserved. And so, as we've heard over and over again over the last couple of days, data. So it comes back to how good is my data on understanding understanding where these communities are. How granular is it? How accurate is it? And so we were presenting, one of the other things that we presented in the pitch was a partnership with a company called Moonshadow Mobile. They're actually a software company based out of Eugene, Oregon, that has built what they call DB for IoT, the database for the moving Internet of Things. It stores incredible amounts of data and allows you to visualize things
much more quickly with massive amounts of data than we're able to with traditional tools. And so as we were showing off what we thought was their cool software, Elliot was like, I kind of like the data, I think. That looks like they have really granular data using a combination of census data and voter data that gets down to the doorstep level, not just the census tract level. And boy, how could I potentially use that data to help drive some of these investment decisions in mobility and really get at the equity issue? So then we started talking and we learned a few lessons.
And I'll go through those lessons. That was great.
Okay.
So I'll try not to repeat stuff, and I don't think we need my title slides because they're not repeating stuff. So just a little orientation to our challenge. Metro is the regional planning agency for the greater Portland region that includes the 24 cities, pieces of 3 counties, several different transit and transportation agencies, north of the south of the river. We don't include the part of the region that extends into Washington. Our region has a really long and robust tradition of regional planning. We think it's one of the reasons why we're great. I can talk with you more about that later. If you're enjoying visiting here and want to check out some of our surroundings outside of Portland, I'm happy to speak with you about the region. So some of my other public agency counterparts were a lot smarter than I was and like brought a really concrete and solvable problem to this tech challenge. And when Lloyd was like, hey, we're kind of trying something out for the first time, start something new, I was like, well, let's just bring one of the most difficult and tractable things that we're dealing with in the region, which is that like many other US cities, the places in our region that are well served by transportation options and close in and offer easy access to jobs and services, including community services that many underserved people rely on, are getting really expensive. And as a result, folks with low income, people of color, and people with all other sorts of characteristics that rely on community services that tend to correlate with being low income or of color, are getting displaced to the areas of the region that are further out. That aren't as well served by transportation and other options, are further from services. So this map shows the percentage change in the population of color in our region. Yellow dots, larger yellow dots mean a bigger decline in people of color. Larger blue dots mean bigger growth in people of color. If I look at a map of income, it looks very similar to this. So you really see this happening in our region. This happened really dramatically. I think this is just over the past 5 years. And so
that problem was really reinforced too with some of the stuff that Hack Oregon was showing us the other day, looking at different data sets but coming to the same conclusion.
Yeah, so we're looking for transportation solutions to better serve the folks that we know need service, need access to things, and figure out ways to do that. And so, I came to this in the world I work in. I explore a lot of partnerships with different new mobility companies. And so I kind of had, a picture of, in my mind going into this of like, okay, well, maybe somebody, like Uber or Reach Now will be at this challenge and start to help us think about like what wheelchair accessible services they've done in other cities. And, that was, I still think that's a fun idea, but that wasn't who was at the table largely at this challenge. We had, as Adrian said, as you've heard from the other presenters, a lot of folks who were really good with data. And, fortunately, we were in a really good position to be flexible because we'd also heard from community that, hey, if you're gonna be planning on our behalf, if you're gonna be investing in our community, you need to start by understanding. So we were able to pivot and start looking at a data project. And as we got into the details of this and started exploring the data that DKS and Moonshadow had to offer, we learned a lot about, through that parallel conversations that we were having in the community about what exactly we needed to have better data on equity. And it came down to there are a lot of different things. Timeliness, census is out, we're relying on census that gets conducted every 10 years. We're pretty far from the last time it was conducted, so it's pretty far out of date. It's not very detailed. You can't see the specific neighborhoods where, the populations you're trying to serve live. But it's also a question of bias and trust in the data. Community groups are really aware that, census and other federal sources tend to undercount people who say are undocumented or, who are living in non-traditional household arrangements. And so we've been facing a lot of different questions from them about the validity of our data. And, one of the things that it came down to during the process is that, trust is the biggest issue for them. They're interested in data quality, but it really comes down to trust in that data. And I guess, that presented us with a really interesting situation with respect to the data that we were seeing from DKS Moonshine, which was, as far as our dreams of data detail and timeliness, totally ticked all the boxes. The folks in our research center was very excited by this. But it was also really, when we thought about actually explaining where this data came from to some of our community members, we started to get a little bit concerned because, it comes from credit bureaus, it comes from voter data. There's a lot of questions about confidentiality as well as about how well folks who are underrepresented are captured in those sources that we weren't able to answer. And I think we're getting to an answer there, but that's the great thing about this challenge, is it gave us a chance to explore these issues in so much greater depth than we would have been able to just through like a vendor pitch where it's purely transactional. Here we get to do something collaborative and dig in together. Last lesson I'll leave y'all with, we need to start by kind of defining our use cases. This is not about DKS Moonshine in particular, but I think about this more broadly as we get pitched by data vendors. I feel like they're kind of picturing, us having like the equivalent of NASA mission control for the region's transportation system, where like we got 30 people monitoring it in real time, and like, oh, we need to change that traffic light from green to red right now. And that is actually, some of our counterparts who operate the roads might need that level of detail, but we're a planning agency and we're dealing with paper maps. Like I said, we're dealing with the decennial census. So we talked about wanting more detailed and up-to-date data, and then like when we started actually seeing what DKS Moonshine had to offer, we realized we should step back and say, well, let's define more detail by our standards, because a lot of, I think somebody, Taylor used the phrase drinking from a fire hose, or somebody used the drinking from a fire hose phrase earlier, and I think that, if we were to do this over again, the one thing I would have done is been very clear about, like a lot more clear about the context that we are applying this data and the capacity that we have to work with it. Anyway, looking forward to the conversation.
And we brought a hammer to the challenge, and we weren't sure if you had a nail or not, and everything looks like a nail and all you got is a hammer, but no, it was great, and like I said, Metro was able to come to some pretty quick decisions about what they did and didn't want to do with some data. They're going to focus a lot more on the use case side of what they're asking for, and it didn't cost them a dime to get there.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
So the next part of this is some questions. I will kick off some questions. A lot of those of you in the audience think a little bit more about some questions you might want to ask. But let me also pause and unveil and excitedly announce that we're going to do this again. We had enough success with this that we are now preparing to do the second Greater Portland Tech Challenge. We won't call it Tech Challenge 2.0, that's my code word for it. But we will do the second Greater Portland Mobility Tech Challenge on February 27th, 2019. And I'm super excited that Daimler Trucks North America will be hosting us again. They've already agreed. They liked it when we came out to their headquarters here in Portland. And they're going to host us again for it won't be quite as long, maybe not a day-long conference, a half to three-quarter day-long pitch challenge day. So I invite all the participants who participated this year to start thinking about your next most interesting and most confounding mobility or transportation challenge. We'll start soliciting challenges soon. With that, out of the way, that plug out of the way, let me lead into some questions. We've got about 25, I've got about 25 minutes left. If you're a guest and have to go off to another meeting or catch your flight, by all means, please head out when you have to. But I'm willing to keep us in here for another 20 minutes or so. I'm curious to know what the biggest obstacle was when you formed your public-private partnership. And I'm not gonna ask every team this. Is there anybody that wants to volunteer? Hey, okay, Jackie, by all means, tell us about the challenge based in not the technical side, but the public-private partnership side.
The biggest challenge in our particular project is getting buy-in from stakeholders. Thank you, in case you couldn't hear me. We have a variety of stakeholders, both from a legal standpoint. We have citizens who might find this a little too futuristic, including elected officials within our city. Staff, people coming to the table and saying, wait, how is this really going to impact us? So from a challenge standpoint, that has been a challenge. Slowly but surely, people are coming around as they see large investments in autonomous vehicles from the automotive business. So that will continue, in my opinion, to be a challenge.
Jackie, thank you. From the private sector side, anybody want to volunteer a challenge? You got back to the office one day after one of your meetings and said, oh, this isn't going anywhere. Anybody experienced with that? Adrian, do you want to say something?
You know, like I was saying, when we went to the Tech Challenge and we're presenting our partnership with Moonshadow as one of the things we were bringing to the table, we were really thinking about the software tool that they had built, the database engine itself and the visualizations that you can create from it. And what Elliot saw was, okay, nobody's coming to the table as far as the pitches with a transportation mobility solution, but I am thinking about the opportunities with using some of these tools for better data analytics. So I don't know what the challenge was, figuring out whether we could really help him or not. And the other thing is, Metro doesn't need a data analytics tool. Metro is a data analytics entity. They are a consumer of all this different data. But I think knowing that, I mean, in hindsight, knowing that was a challenge now, helping Elliot discover the issues around what are the questions I'm really trying to ask, and then what are the data sources I'm really looking for to answer those. I'm really glad for the journey.
No, yeah, I'll follow up on that. I think on our side of that collaboration, the biggest challenge was, I mentioned the importance of transparency in everything that we do as a public agency. And the biggest challenge for us was getting documentation and really having an understanding of what happens within the data we were seeing from Moonshadow. Think about how we were going to explain that, because Moonshadow is great at providing data, providing an easy to interact with platform access data, but they're getting that data from third parties, and some of those third parties are mashing that up with data from fourth parties. And so getting to the bottom of, hey, what are we really seeing here? That took a little bit longer than would have been, I shouldn't say it took longer than we would have liked. It took as long as it took, but it made it hard, to kind of, it made it a little more challenging to get this data out in front of community on the timeline that we were hoping to work with communities on this equity data issue.
So I can add something too in terms of the private sector. I think one of the biggest challenges we started off with is actually defining what the problem is. We solved it. I think we're trying to solve it, but the biggest challenge was really getting a consensus, as Jack was saying, is on the what the project is and getting the support for the project. But internally, in terms of when we were working together, is really trying to understand what are we dealing with here. It's a futuristic thing that we're talking about, Flintstone-ish or not, the Jetstones.
Jetsons.
Yeah, there you go. But the point is, it's really trying to understand what that technology really means, and how do we apply it to a need. And then we look at the need itself, and how can we expand that need to really mean something meaningful for the community, for the region as a whole. And I think our challenge, as we started going through the meetings and understanding what the needs are, the definitions became a little bit clearer, the goal and purpose became a little bit clearer. So it shifted a little bit when we started talking about it at the beginning, but I think we reached that consensus, at least in terms.
That's good to hear that point, because I want to restate something. My opening slide mentioned to everybody that we had 3 goals here. Highlight the problem-solving talent that's right here in the greater Portland region, solve some problems. The 3rd one. What we were also interested in doing was creating, through the tech challenge, create a safe space so that public agencies could work on, worry on, like my puppy dog does, chew on the bone a little bit of the problem, worry it a little bit until they got to the right problem before they had to issue an RFP, right? This tech challenge helps these public sector agencies get the ducks in a row before they have to go to an RFP. There's some value for the public sector in doing that. You're not wasting time heading left when you should head right. So I want to, just a show of hands from our participants, whose challenge basically stayed the same from the pitch and the consults all the way to today, and who had such a defined challenge that was pretty much the same the whole time? So, okay, PAC Oregon's, yours was pretty consistent the whole way through because your host agencies had a very defined program to solve open access, open data. Everybody else, through the pitches, the one-on-one consults, and even through the pilot demo phase, your ideas and your work evolved.
Right, and I think it evolved more as a result of discovery. So I think that was the communication that opened up that discovery period. Really, I mean, it's an evolution that followed the same path, but it wasn't necessarily different from what we were talking about in the beginning, but evolved into what is more substantial.
And an evolution that you can not afford to do once you issue a multi-million-dollar RFP for a project. You don't have that leeway once you issue. Okay, great, good to know. At the elevator pitch level, does anybody want to give me the benefit they gained? So it's a reminder to us, the audience, the benefit you gained from working with either a public or a private sector partner. Give me a summary. Taylor, you ready for that?
I would say that for us, our benefit and our biggest challenge were both the same thing. This is definitely the first small-scale pilot that we've done as a city in terms of something that's very temporary and new. So we ran into a lot of obstacles as far as working this sort of solution into our regular workflows, because we already have things that are established and that work. And we found something that kind of disrupted that is much more efficient than what we currently had in place, but there's still a real challenge to get that in place. So we were fortunate to have a partner that was really nimble and obviously really quick if they got this much imagery and data this quick. And we had to figure out how to kind of force ourselves along to keep up with the pace of the pilot and make sure that we could both be mutually beneficial to each other.
Oh, sure. So I think, and I'm hoping you comment on a private sector partner leading both a public agency and working with a private sector partner. That's an interesting.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
No, I think my most interesting thing about learning about this, and I've told a lot of people about this, is that Jackie kind of represents a lot of the people who are going to make these decisions. Jackie's really young; she's in her early 30s.
Not.
But I just don't want to play old. But most of our councils are of a generation that are not playing with code. We're not out there learning new technologies on a day-to-day basis. A lot of our council people are either retired or have second jobs, but they're not necessarily in the tech community. And I think one of the most interesting things that we need to continue to do with things like this is to expose the elected officials to the opportunities coming down the pipe. And probably 6 months ago, Jackie probably wasn't talking to her husband about the autonomous vehicle, now it's probably a much bigger discussion. And we need to have elected officials thinking about this is going to happen and not be scared about it, but being able to work through the ideas. And as we get, as we educate our elected officials, our jobs will become easier to push the technologies. We're not fighting. I have somebody inside the city that I'm gonna have to go work on, and he's of that generation. And I have to go educate him that this autonomous vehicles are going to happen, whether he likes it or not. And it's just a matter of time. But the more we do this, the more of these tech challenges where we bring the private and the public sectors together and we learn together, because I learned a ton from Omar, which is awesome. The more we learn, the easier it is for us to be pitching these ideas in the future.
I want to kind of pick up on that a little bit too, because.
And then I'm gonna come to the audience with, I'm gonna pick on one of you for the question.
So I've had the benefit of being involved with the greater, the GCTC, the Global Cities Team Challenge here in Portland for the last few years, and then being part of the, helping Portland draft the Smart Cities Challenge response from the USDOT, and then this event. And what we're just seeing happen through these different sort of innovative experiments is our cities are recognizing that their traditional procurement processes do not keep up with the pace of innovation. And so it's not just a generational thing on how old our city councilors are, it's the processes that are in place that they have to go through to be able to do one of those big procurements we're talking about. You must sit down and write all of the functional and technical requirements and put out a request for proposal, and then the vendor community will tell you whether their solution complies with that. From concept to contract is at best 1.5 years, in many cases 2 or 3 years from the time that an agency is thinking something up to the time they could actually sign a contract. With the pace of innovation with technology, 3 years, the thing that you're asking for back then was already obsolete, and you're asking for the wrong thing. So what these pilots and demonstrations allow us to do is experiment with these new emerging technologies, learn a lot of lessons. The tech industry for a long time has said, using agile development and these other techniques, we're gonna fail, but fail fast and then fix fast. And cities are learning that that's the way they need to experiment with technology as well, is go ahead and do some pilots and do some demonstrations. And fail doesn't really mean fail the way that us civil engineers were trained, where a bridge falls down and somebody dies. Fail means, wow, we learned a lot of lessons, like we did with data. So now that we've learned those lessons, let's go do it on a little bit bigger scale and a little bit bigger scale. And I think that's one of the things that I'm just seeing with this whole smart cities movement in general, is cities acknowledging that if they're gonna keep up with innovation, they need to work together with the private sector in a way they haven't in the past.
I would like to add.
And then you share how your agency's gonna help them.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. So from the City of Portland perspective, based on the current priorities framework that we have, I think I would add that we need to add to these efforts the final customer. In our case, it could be a grassroots organization, it could be a economic development group, a group of businesses that are in our neighborhood, for instance, so we can actually connect all the dots. We can actually work directly with whoever is going to be the end user from the very beginning. It's also an exercise to develop a common language. So something that we would like to see all these different neighborhoods and organizations to get a really better grasp of what technology means to them. And we want to see also all these different like technology developers and tech firms to understand what the real needs are on the streets, you know. So quickly, as a team effort, we can just use very, very wisely our time to resolve real problems.
Excellent comment, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because in the next tech challenge that we're gonna again do on the February 27th challenge day in 2019, leading up to that, we are going to invite the cities that want to work with community groups and disadvantaged populations to add that into their prep for their challenge. So that's a new, nice new twist and component we're adding to the next tech challenge. But before we get to the next tech challenge, something else is going to happen in this region is very interesting, and Elliot can tell you about that, and then I'm going to see if there's anybody in the audience with a question.
I have to dial back that going to happen so I don't get over my skis.
Might happen.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, you know, at Metro, one of the things that we do is give out funding to help support projects that meet our regional goals. And we recognize a lot, and we took a lot of the lessons from this challenge to heart. That, you know, we need to be supporting that kind of iterative approach to transportation project development that Adrian and so many others have discussed today. And so we have our emerging technology strategy, which is part of our regional transportation plan. That's out for public review, I think, next week. And so you can check that out if you want. One of the things that you'll see if you do is that it calls on Metro to create a funding program to support technology pilots in our region. And so I'll be developing a proposal to do that, to take to our council in the next month. If you are someone who is interested in this type of program, now's a great time to be talking with me, just to give, I'm curious, we're trying to speak with as many people for their thoughts about what we can do to nurture successful projects. The three things that we really want to do with this program, and what our council's directed me to do, are first, test implementation approaches. So test projects that are actually transportation services that move people. In some new way, provide some sort of new transportation service to people. Second, get information about how those projects work from the and third, develop partnerships of the type that Hector was just talking about between not just public agencies in the private sector, but also the community groups and others who represent the real end users of these technologies, so that we get the framework in place that we need to kind of scale up this success. And we're really excited to be working alongside Greater Portland on that, because the Tech Challenge, we think, is going to be a really critical incubator for this program, and it's already influenced, you know, it's already, in case not apparent, it's already influenced, you know, that initial proposal, that initial idea in our council. The work that we've done, that folks have done, getting elected officials and others comfortable with the new world that we're in is really great preparation for this work. So really appreciate it.
And you've made a budget request for that program?
Yeah.
And you don't want to tell us. And Elliot is tracking down some funding to support this grant program.
It will be funded.
So that projects will compete for funding.
It will not be an unfunded grant program.
Projects.
I promise that.
So there's an opportunity to compete for funding. Okay. I'm squinting because of the projectors in my lights in my eye. Is there anybody from our guests or our audience that would like to ask a follow-up question of any of our partners or of me at GPI who do something challenge? If not, it's close enough that we can wrap up. And I'll do that. Let me thank you, all of our public sector partners, all of our private sector partners, and our guests here today. Thanks for joining us. I look forward to seeing all of you on February 27th at the Challenge Day in 2019.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you.